What if Katseye were a Slits-style post-punk group? This week we'll be taking a look at the rise of that particular international girl group phenomenon, as well as celebrating the legacy of chaotic post-punk pioneers the Slits, and asking ourselves what could the Slits and Katseye possibly have in common with one another. All this and more on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name's Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel, followed on Wednesday by one of these What If, How and Why videos where I discuss the artists and genres involved in my What If video and share some insights into my recording and arranging process. The idea of these What If videos is that each week I pick a popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocals of that song and record a new backing track to them using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring this alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Gnarly by Katseye. I tried to reimagine that in the sort of spiky, dubby, post-punk style of the Slits. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. Now, whilst I do try and keep at least slightly up to date with contemporary pop music, I must admit, I'm an old punk. Quite a lot of the time, stuff just passes me by. But one recent pop cultural phenomenon that I am a little bit up to speed with is Katseye, purely because a little while ago I happened to end up on a whim watching a Netflix show called Pop Star Academy. I've always been a bit of a sucker for daft pop-based reality shows anyway, going back to Pop Idol and Pop Stars decades ago. So I saw this new Netflix show advertised about the process of putting together an international band based on the sort of K-pop idol system. I was kind of fascinated. I don't know a great deal about K-pop, I should just say. I've only ever sort of vaguely dipped my toe into it. I've heard the odd song by Les Seraphim and Twice and Blackpink and whoever, but I'm not remotely up to speed with that. I mean, my favourite K-pop band's 4 Minute, and they split up, I think, over a decade ago now, so that's about how contemporary my understanding of K-pop is. But I do find that whole idol system that they've got really interesting in a slightly dystopian sort of way, so being able to watch the group being formed through that process would be really, really interesting. And it certainly was an eye-opener. It's quite a show. I do recommend, if you have any interest in like the mechanics of the contemporary pop industry, definitely check it out. Just getting all these young girls from all over the world brought in. Everyone's obviously sent in audition tapes and stuff, and they put them all up in this house and start this process. And at that stage, it all seems fairly familiar from watching X Factor or Pop Idol or whatever. It's like, you know, they always go through this stage where there's a boot camp that gradually whittles people down. Normally, I think on those shows, you know, the boot camp's a couple of weeks or something of intense pop star training. This one, it's 2 years, 2 entire years of these kids' lives of just spending every day training to be a pop star in this quasi-military environment. It's absolutely nuts. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating because they're just working these kids so hard. People getting injured, people getting sick, and they're just having to push through or fall by the wayside. And the label, obviously it's a massive, expensive gamble for them. So they're sticking their oar in all the time. They keep adding extra people into the process, throwing ringers in when they're worried that the lineup isn't going to be strong enough. Absolutely crazy. And after they've been through this whole 2 years of training, thinking that at the end of it, they're going to be judged purely on their merits, they spring this extra surprise on them where it's like, oh, actually, it's going to now be an internet elimination show where fans are going to vote for you. And so all of a sudden it becomes this popularity contest, and they have to take to this huge social media campaign to build up their profile. Oh yeah, the end result is that they have this ostensibly public voted but suspiciously carefully curated international lineup of girls from 6 different parts of the globe who Hybe, the company behind it, who are the company behind a bunch of these massive K-pop acts are going to take forward as their new international flagship act. And it's a big deal, but then you hear their debut single, and after that huge grueling process and all this build-up, it's a perfectly fine pop song, but it's weirdly underwhelming. Very much the sort of thing that any second-tier K-pop band could have delivered at any point in the last several years. And I found it weird that after they'd gone to all this presumed expense and gone through this massive process to put this group together, that was what they would come up with. And the other songs from that debut EP as well, similarly adequate but not enthralling kind of pop music. So it sort of seemed like after all that, the whole thing was maybe going to be a bit of a damp squib. But then almost a year after that, this new single emerged called Gnarly. And I remember just seeing it pop up on my YouTube feed. I clicked on it thinking, well, I wonder if they've changed anything up. And boy, had they ever changed things up. It's such a total contrast to what they'd done before. Obnoxious, crude, quite aggressive sounding, and really strange, like not very much like anything that any other pop group is particularly putting out at the moment. I mean, the obvious comparison that you would make is Brat era Charlie XCX has definitely got that hyperpop feel. It's got the sort of the trashy party girl aesthetic and that kind of really upfront, obnoxious attitude that she sort of brought to that record. But it's a pretty singular sounding thing. And the initial reaction was a mixture of shock and revulsion overall from most people. For the first sort of week or so, I did see a lot of people on the internet being absolutely horrified by this record, like considering it to be total commercial suicide and what have you. But after a little bit, the perception started to change and you start to see little kind of critical think pieces about it, people reassessing it. And it really interestingly kind of totally turned around to the point where by the end of the year, it was in loads of critics' top records of the year polls and things. Never ended up being a massive hit in chart terms, but it was quite culturally ubiquitous. You heard it cropping up all over the place. And weirdly ended up being one of the emblematic pop songs of 2025. I must admit, even from first hearing, I actually always really quite liked it. It's bratty and foul-mouthed in a way that feels like almost a bit punk, albeit in a carefully curated corporate sort of way. I think musically it's actually pretty interesting too. It's minimalist, harsh electronica with these occasionally quite surprising change-ups, which I thought was pretty interesting. And actually the song, although it deliberately sounds vacuous, I think the more you listen to it, the more it feels like it's satirizing rather than celebrating those sort of attitudes. It's kind of a depiction of a cynical, jaded culture where no one's surprised or impressed by anything. Everything is just described as gnarly and it doesn't really mean anything anymore because everything's so coated in this thick layer of irony. I actually thought that was pretty cool and I was quite glad that people seemed to come around to it. And then the other stuff from that same EP continued to be pretty good. Nothing as shocking as that single. Most of it was a bit more kind of standard pop fare, but pretty good standard pop fare. And it's really turned their fortunes round. Although, unfortunately, their most recent release, which came out just around New Year, I think, Internet Girl, definitely seems to be trying again for that sort of gnarly shock factor. It's a bit off the wall, quite deliberately grating in some ways. And I don't know if the trick's going to work in their favour this time. That initial negative reaction doesn't seem to have turned around in quite the same way. But hopefully they're now well established enough to be able to survive the occasional miss. Because yeah, having watched that documentary and seen the grueling ordeal that they all went through to get to where they are, I kind of feel like they deserve to at least have a decent bit of time at the top. Yeah, as I say, of all their songs so far, Gnarly was really the one that I particularly felt like I could try and do something with, just because it is so odd. I kind of kicked a few ideas around and didn't really go anywhere with them until a little while ago when I finally belatedly read Viv Albertine's book. It's a fascinating book. If you haven't read it, definitely well worth checking out. One of the more riveting music reads I've delved into in the last several years. But that sent me off for the first time in years, actually, listening to the Slits again and revisiting those old records. It suddenly struck me that this is maybe the style that Gnarly might work with. They're definitely an interesting band, the Slits. It took me a while to get into them. I think when I first got into punk rock as a teenager, what most excited me about it was just the kind of stripped back, noise and drive of it, the Johnny Ramone wall of distortion and the speed and the power. So that was kind of what I was looking for in punk rock records. And when I heard the Slits, they were very obviously, for the most part, not doing that quite deliberately. So at the time, it didn't really resonate so much with me. It was only a few years later when I kind of came back and revisited them that I was able to appreciate what they were doing, which was very much still punk in terms of its attitude and execution, but was also very consciously, deliberately stripping away the masculine, macho element of what punk had already become, I guess, at that stage. And they just took the ingredients of punk and just did something completely different with them. So instead of being based around this wall of distorted guitar, most of the melodic content is actually coming from the bass, this big fat dubby bass sound, so much dub reggae in their sound, while the guitar, instead of playing these big chords, it's got this thin, spiky, kind of needling sound, which owes more to funk players or what the guitarists in Captain Beefheart's Magic Band were doing. If you listen to things like Troutmask Replica, it's kind of scratchy, spiky guitar lines on that definitely feel like a really important precedent for what Viv Albertine ended up doing on the guitar in the Slits. And yeah, rhythmically as well, especially once they got Budgie in on drums for the Cut album, there's none of that pogoing straight ahead rhythmic drive that you expect of punk. They're much more taking elements from reggae or ska or soul. It's music that you can dance to rather than pogo to, if you know what I mean. All topped off by Ari Up's completely chaotic, non-traditional approach to songwriting, tossing out the rule book, very rarely anything approaching conventional song structure, and overall just this sense of chaos that's bordering on collapse, but somehow held together by this sort of rock-solid grooving rhythm section, which is pretty compelling, I think, and quite different to what anyone else was doing, certainly in that early punk scene. And that's why I tend to refer to them as a post-punk band, even though they were part of that initial 1976 wave of UK punk. They sonically feel a lot more like post-punk. I think they definitely fit in a lot more with that generation of bands, the Delta 5, the Au Pairs, sound much more of a piece with that kind of scene than they do with, say, The Damned or The Clash. So yeah, tremendously interesting and influential band, and it might ostensibly seem like there's nothing at all to connect them to Katseye. I mean, one band is this utterly ragtag, anarchic collective that formed organically from a DIY music scene to make these fiercely uncompromising and uncommercial records, and the other is a manufactured girl group put together by a massive corporation to attempt to take over the world. But there are some parallels, I think, certainly in terms of that particular Katseye song. I mean, the things that appeal to me about Gnarly, its attitude, its abrasive but minimalist groove, and its sense of chaos that threatens to tear everything apart. Those are all things that I also find really appealing in the music of the Slits. So that was really what made me want to put those two together. But also, I would just say that both groups are, in a way, international girl groups, although only one of them deliberately by design. Obviously, in the Slits, Ari Up was German. Palm Olive, the original drummer, was from Spain. And Viv Albertine, although she is British, she was born in Australia, and her father's French or Corsican, I think, as well. So, yeah, kind of international. And obviously, as I say, Katseye come from literally all over the place. So, two very different international girl groups, but just at least from that one song, I do feel like there's a certain spirit that unites them. Maybe I'm reaching, I don't know. But yeah, anyway, that takes me to this week's alternative universe scenario. So in my alternative timeline, everything's much as it is in this universe, except that all the members of Katseye were born 45 years earlier. So we're in 1979. Disco's been peaking for a few years, but there's a group of managers who are still convinced that there's more ways to cash in on the disco boom. They've seen the success of American vocal groups like the Pointer Sisters and Sister Sledge, knocking out these great sort of soul disco classics. And they think, maybe we can put together a group that does that, but rather than just being American, they're from all over the globe, so that they have direct appeal in as many different markets as possible. So they put together a massive campaign to get auditionees from all different nations. And the result is that they end up with this group of 6 girls who they put together as Katseye to sing these disco soul songs in the Sister Sledge vein to try and capture this international market. So they do this, get some songs recorded, but unfortunately the disco boom is already starting to wane by this point. So Katseye's records in this style don't really kind of cut through commercially, and the girls themselves are obviously heartbroken that after going through this process that they're not getting the success they were hoping for. So they decide to cut ties with their management and just go it alone and see if they can change direction and find success on their own. And as it happens, during all this time, they've been listening to other stuff aside from disco that's going on in the world, and what they've become particularly interested in is the burgeoning post-punk scene. They've been hearing bands like the Slits and the Raincoats and Kleenex performing this exciting, spiky, feminist music that challenges listeners rather than just going along with the prevailing trends. And they think, if only we could do something more like that. So completely abandon the disco sound, start working on their own songs, which are much more in this vein, punky aggression, but with a sort of dubby rhythm section. And this gets the attention of Rough Trade Records, who signed them and released their debut single, which is Gnarly. And while they never achieved the commercial heights that their managers originally hoped for them during the disco days, they go on to be a massive influence on both the 80s indie scene and the 90s riot girl movement. So, in attempting to turn Gnarly into a dub punk Slits style thing, my first step as ever was just to get the isolated vocal, drop it into GarageBand, sync it up to the grid. With that done, I sped the tempo up a little bit, because although I didn't want the pace to be racing away, I did want it to have a good, solid kind of drive to it, so I sped it up a little. I programmed on some drums, using 2 different GarageBand kits for various sounds. I think most of it is the Roots, which is the reggae kit, but then I used a different kit for the snare, because it's just got a really kind of good high pinky snare sound that I wanted. So very reggae-ish parts, keeping a good sort of drive going in there, some cool little fills. To make things a bit more dubby, I added some effects, which isn't something I normally do on drums, but it was good fun to mess around with this time. So on the snare, we've got a huge cavernous reverb that comes on occasionally just for specific hits, so you'll just get this sudden massive echoing kind of thwack in the midst of the track. And I also added a few bits to the rest of the kit, so I think every time there's a tom fill, that's got some phasing on, so you just get this interesting, slightly psychedelic modulation as the drummer kind of fills around the kit, which I thought was pretty cool. I think I also used a bit of flanger on some hi-hats at some point, so just a few sort of effects just to give it that slightly psychedelic dubby feel. Then I added some bass, kept it pretty simple. There's just really a couple of riffs that just cycle round. Tried to turn the sort of synth bass lines from the original record into a sort of reggae style bass line, and then just went for a really kind of fat, warm, dubby tone. So I rolled all the tone off on my bass, played with my fingers, and that's kind of like the rock that holds the whole thing together. And then just a pair of guitars panned left and right, both with quite thin, spiky, single coil pickup kind of sounds, and I just tried to play those off against each other. So they're doing just mainly quite rhythmic things, like little kind of reggae-ish, just choppy chords, and then occasional little bits of noise as well. And again, I've just mixed in some odd little bits of effects to go for a bit more of a slightly trippy, dubby vibe. So you'll hear occasionally there's a tape echo that clicks on, and so just the occasional note will just sustain indefinitely until I click that back off again, which I think just creates a bit more of that slightly chaotic, unpredictable atmosphere that we're looking for from a kind of Slits style cut era track. Then for the video, as ever, started out with some footage of Katseye performing the song live. In order to avoid getting nailed for copyright, I used a fan cam from, I think, their debut UK performance. So I used that as the basis of it. Because it doesn't have any instrumentalists on, I wanted to get a backing band in. So what better band to use for a Slit style thing than actually the Slits? So we've got some footage of them in there too. A bit of Tessa Pollitt plodding away on the bass, a bit of Viv Albertine clanking away on the guitar, some Nana Cherry dancing in there as well. And then just for a bit more period atmosphere, I found some cool footage of various punky type characters on, I think, King's Road in London in 1980. And so just intercut some of that, some of these beautiful outcasts of the era milling around in there too, just to add a bit more period authenticity. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm aware it's a little bit out of left field possibly, but I did enjoy putting it together, and I actually kind of think for a bit of an odd combination, it works surprisingly well. But let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you did enjoy it, please like, share, subscribe. All of that stuff really helps. I always really appreciate it. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any artists or songs or genres you'd like me to take a look at, do let me know. Your suggestions are always most welcome. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll hope to see you next time.